guys, welcome to My Sew Bliss. Today we're going to be doing a sew along for this simple and easy jumpsuit. It's a Simplicity 1355 pattern. It's quick, it's easy, and super cute. Super on trend right now and perfect for summer. So let's get started. So the supplies that I'm using are the pattern and just my basic sewing supplies like my sewing machine, needle, thread, that kind of thing. But first I cut out all my pattern pieces. Here I have these ones. I actually altered the back of mine. I wanted a scoop neck. So you can see I rounded that out instead of a V-neck. You don't have to do that. And then I altered the facing piece to match the back scoop neck. So just in case you want to do that, you can, but you don't have to. So once you have all your pattern pieces cut out, the first step that we are going to do is take the bodice back piece and the bodice front piece, and we're going to stay stitch around the neckline. Stay stitching just helps so that your neckline won't stretch out. So it's just a regular stitch that we're doing right along the neckline at 1/2 inch. So here I have my bodice front piece, and when you stay stitch, you're actually going to start down in the front at the point. So this is the point of the V-neck. I'm going to start here and go up one side, and then start here and go up one side, because as you're stitching, you're actually stretching the fabric, so that's going to help in the long run. And I'm just stitching at 1/2 inch. My sewing machine, I'm actually just going to line up my front bodice piece shoulder seams. We're making a pleat there. So I have my marking here. This is one line and this is another line. This is actually the solid line, and then this is the dashed line. So I'm taking the solid line and folding it over to the dashed line, and that will create a little pleat for us and finish off the top right here, so that it will attach to those shoulder straps later on. So I'll just pin that in place. So I'm gonna baste that down so it holds it there and it's ready to go for when we put our shoulder straps in. So basting is just making your stitch really long. I put mine at a 5, and I'm gonna do mine at 1/2 inch and just go straight across. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. So I just realized my back bodice piece is abnormally large because I hadn't opened it up before. And that's because I created that round neck. So I'm actually going to cut it in half and make it a little smaller, because I forgot that as the V-neck overlaps, this doesn't, and it made it extra large. So with the pleats done on the front, I'm going to lay my back piece on my table, front piece on top, and I'm going to match up my side seams and with matching up those notches, and then I'm going to go sew them together. I'm just going to be using my serger, but you can use a straight stitch or a special stitch like a French seam or a flat felled seam. Once you have your side seams finished, we're going to set that off to the side and grab your shoulder strap piece. It should look like this. You should have 2 of them. And with each piece, we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to take it, I put the interfacing on the back, and I'm going to fold it right sides together. And there should be dot markings on it, and you're just going to match those dots up and pin it in place. And then I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and sew a straight line from this dot up here down to this bottom dot, and that's going to create a tube. So once we have it into a tube, we're going to turn it right sides out. We're also going to be stitching at 3/8 inch, and again, just straight across. Now I'm ready to turn the tube right sides out. Then before I go any further, I like to give it a good pressing so that it's just laying really nice and looks nice. Now I'm ready to take my strap, and I'm going to put it on to the front. So I already did one strap, and this is the front bodice piece. So I'm going over to the shoulder seam, or at least where the shoulder seam will connect to the strap, and I'm just lining it up with the dots. So there's a dot here, here on both pieces. Lining that up, I'll pin it in place, and then I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to baste it into place. So it'll look like that. Now we're ready to take our facing, and this is the front facing, and I'm gonna finish off this bottom edge, so right along here. I'm gonna finish mine off with a serger. If you don't have a serger, you could fold it under and top stitch it down, or tuck it in and roll it twice, so like this and then like this, and then top stitch it so you won't ever see those raw edges again. Just something that will look really nice on the inside. I'm also going to be doing the same thing to my back facing pieces and just serging around the edges that don't have the notches on it. So with those edges finished, I'm going to take my front facing piece and my back facing piece, put them right sides together. There should be notches right there. See those little cuts I made? That is going to be matched up. We're going to pin those in place. And do the same thing on the other side. And then I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch it down at 5/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to iron those seams open. I don't want to use my serger because I want it to lay really nice and flat and not add extra bulk. Now with those facing pieces attached to each other, we're ready to attach it to the front and back bodice. So here I have my front bodice facing up. The right sides are facing up. So I'm putting right sides together. I like to start with the V-neck and just match up those edges. And then I'm going to go around and just match up the notches that I have. When I come to the shoulder seam, you want to make sure that the strap is down and that you're sandwiching that strap between the facing and the bodice front. So I'll pin that down. And do the same thing on the other side. And then I'll just continue around. Now with those facing pieces attached to each other, we're ready to attach it to the front and back bodice. So here I have my front bodice facing up. The right sides are facing up, so I'm putting right sides together. I like to start with the V-neck and just match up those edges. And then I'm going to go around and just match up the notches that I have. When I come to the shoulder seam, you want to make sure that the strap is down and that you're sandwiching that strap between the facing and the bodice front. So I'll pin that down and do the same thing on the other side. And then I'll just continue around. Now, when I get to the back shoulder seam, there's going to be dots right here on either side, and I'm actually going to stitch to that point and leave this open so that we can put the strap in later. So I'll stitch to that point and then stop stitching and then come over to this point and continue stitching. So if you want to mark your pins, like have your pins marking where that's going to be, that should help out a little bit. My one side, and again my back's a little different than yours if you kept that V-neck, so just finish off the V-neck all the way down to the bottom. Now that we have it all pinned and ready, I'm going to stitch around the whole facing at 5/8 of an inch, and again just make sure on the back that you're leaving this part open right here so that we can put the strap in later. So I'll just do that now. Now here I have the interfacing put on. One thing that I want to do before I do any clipping is reinforce the V-neck. So I'm just going to go over the stitching I already did, a couple inches up and then go to the point and then a couple inches up again. So here I've stitched down to the point, put my needle down, and then I'll pivot and go right back up on my stitching again, just a couple inches, and that'll really reinforce this V-neck and help it to look really nice. Once I have my stitching done, there's a few things that we want to do before we turn it right sides out. So first I'm going to go to my point and I'm going to clip to the point. Don't clip through your stitching, just clip to it. And then I'm also going to go around and trim my seam. I'm probably going to cut off half of it. Now another thing that you want to make sure to do is clip along the armhole area, because that is a curved edge and you want it to just lay nice, and clipping will help it to lay nice once we turn it right sides out. And then also on the points of the shoulder seams, I clip the points off so that it'll lay nicer and reduce the bulk up in here. So I did that to both. Well, I'm going to do that. I need to still do it on this side, but I'm going to do that to both sides. And yeah, so and then we'll be ready to turn it right sides out. Next, I'm going to take my facing and pull it to the right sides out, pull this out. And I'm going to take it over to my ironing board and just iron it down really good. You want to make sure that you're kind of pressing the seam so that you don't see the facing on the right side, but you just see your bodice front piece or your bodice back piece, and that's it. So that'll just finish off that edge and looks really nice. So once you've ironed your facing, then we're going to take the strap and we're actually going to put it on the back. Mine's going to be a little different because the facing had some issues because I altered it, so it's open. But yours should look more like this. So I'm going to take my strap and I'm going to tuck it in there. And obviously yours is going to tuck and lay a lot nicer than mine. And you won't be able to open it up like that, but it should look just like that. I'm gonna do that on both shoulder straps. Just make sure your strap isn't twisted when you're putting it through, because you don't want it to lay on you twisted. So I'm just putting it right through there and then stitching right across the top at 5/8 of an inch. Here I have mine stitched, so I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to trim and thin that out and trim the corners so that when I turn it right sides out, it looks really nice. And then I can flip that right sides out. That's my facing. Of course, yours is going to look a little different in the facing, but then I need to iron that a little better. But then it should look a little like that. Once you have your straps placed, then we're going to understitch our facing. And this just holds it down so it's not flipping up on us. So what you're going to do is wherever you want to start, this is my underarm I'm going to start. And here's my facing. You can see my seam right here. I'm going to, and if you need to, you can iron it again. I'm going to stitch right along this edge. It's not going to show on the front or the back piece like the bodice pieces. It'll just show on the facing, and you're just stitching it to the seam. So we're just catching that. If you need to iron the seam over, free to do that. But then I'm just going to stitch all the way around to hold that facing down. So I'm just going to start right here by my shoulder strap. Obviously, you're not going to be able to go closer to the top. So I'm just going to start and sew as close to the edge without going over that seam allowance, and just go all the way around. You've done the understitching on your facing, it should look a little bit like this. Obviously my back might be different than yours, but now we just want to do a little stitch on the side seams, and that's going to hold it in place, make sure it stays down. I like to do what's called a stitch in the ditch, and it's just going along your seam allowance and stitching right in the middle of the seam allowance, right in the ditch, and that just will hold it in place, hold this in place really well. So I'm just going to take it over to my machine and do it on that side seam and on this side seam as well. Here's what the stitch in the ditch will look like, so you can kind of see it right in here. But I just did it all the way down to the side of the facing. Just hold it in place really nicely, and now I'm ready to continue on. The next step is for if you're doing the V-neck in the back, and you're just going to overlap your two pieces, match up the notches on the bottom, and baste those together. Baste them right here so it's ready to go, and then we can work on the pants so then they're ready to attach later on. So I don't have to do that, but if you're doing the V-neck, make sure that you baste those two together and just match up the notches. Once you have that done on your top, then we're going to take our pant pieces. And here I have my front piece and my back piece, and they're laying right sides together, and there should be a notch right in this crotch seam right here. So I have a notch right there, and there's my other notch. So I'm going to match those up and pin them together. And then I'll just pin all the way down the rest of the inseam of the leg, and I'm going to sew those together at 5/8 of an inch, and I'm going to do that on both legs. Okay, now that I have the inseam sewn on both legs, then I'm going to take them, open them up, and with right sides together, I'm just going to lay them right on top of each other and match up that center seam, and I'll pin that in place. And then I'll just go around and match up the notches and line the rest of it up. Now next I'm going to take it over to my serger, and I'm going to serge right around here, and then I'm actually going to take it over to my sewing machine and just do a regular stitch to really reinforce it, because this seam usually sees a lot of tension, so that'll just really hold it and keep it in place and make sure it doesn't open up. Once you've reinforced the crotch seam, I just opened it up so they're laying right sides out just like a pair of pants, and now I'm going to insert the pocket pieces or sew them on. So I just have one pocket piece, and I'm laying it right sides together on top of one of my pant leg pieces, and I'm matching up the dots. So I have one dot here, one dot here. I'm going to match that up and put a pin there. And then I'm also, the top line will match up, so I'll just pin that, keep it in place. And then the bottom dot will match up. I'll pin that in place. And I'm going to go around and do that with all 4 pocket pieces and all 4 pant legs. And then I'm going to take it over to my serger, and I'm going to stitch that down at 3/8 of an inch. You can use your sewing machine as well. After I had all my pockets sewn on, I then pressed them so that the seam allowance is going towards the pocket and the pocket is going out. So it just looks really nice and is ready to be sewn together. So now I'm going to take my pants, and I'm just going to put them right sides together, matching up the legs, the notches, all the things. So it's kind of a giant piece that we have to work with, but you just start matching everything up. So here I have one of my side seams and my pockets. So I'm going to line up those pockets, line up the seams, and pin those in place. And I'm going to mark where those dots are, because I can still see the markings. So I have one right there and one right here, and that's going to tell me where to stitch to, because we obviously don't want to stitch our pocket closed. And then I'm just going to continue on down the side of the leg, matching up those side seams and matching up any notches. All pinned, I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch my side seams together. Now I'm going to start up here at the top, and I'm going to come down to the dot, and then I'm going to back stitch and make sure that's really reinforced. And I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'll start and back stitch right at this dot, which I marked with my pin, and then I'll continue on down the leg. Then I'm also going to stitch all the way around the pocket to enclose it. After I have my side seams all done, I took my scissors and I clipped right here on the pocket. just so that seam can lay open and there's not as much bulk right there. And then I'm gonna sew, or baste, actually. I'm gonna baste the pocket to the front, and that's just gonna hold it in place, because next we're gonna do the waist and put the bodice on top. So we just wanna make sure that both pockets are laying nice, and I'll clip. So I'm clipping to the stitching, not through the stitching. That way that can just lay open. And I'm trying to decide if I'm gonna serge this or just leave it stitched. Probably serge it, just because this linen can get kind of messy. So I'll probably serge my edges as well. And just press those side seams open and baste the pocket to the side. So that way it's just ready to go and it doesn't get in the way or have any issues when we're putting the bodice on next. Once you have your pants completely done, you're gonna turn them right sides out, and I just have them laying down on my table. And then I'm gonna take the bodice. So this is the top part, and mine is wrong sides out, because we're then going to take it, I'm just gonna turn it upside down and put the pants inside of it. Now I'm gonna make sure that the front of the bodice is matching up with the front of the pants, and the back is matching up with the back. And I'm also going to go around and match up my side seams and pin those in place. My fabric is fraying a lot, so it kind of looks really messy right now. But just match up those side seams, and then we're gonna go around and match up the notches as well. And it should be laying right sides together. And I have a seam in my center back, so I'm gonna match that up as well. And then match up those notches and just match that edge up so that we can sew those together. So now I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch all the way around this at 3/4 of an inch. After you have this seam sewn, then we're actually going to trim the bodice part of the seam. So just that one layer. Let me see if I can separate it. So just this layer, I'm gonna trim to about 1/4 of an inch. So I have my laying right sides out, and here I have the bodice piece, and I just cut that. So now I'm gonna take it over to my ironing board. I'm gonna iron the other seam allowance, so the pants seam allowance, and I'm gonna iron it up and also iron this edge and fold it under, and that's gonna create our casing where we're gonna put elastic in all the way around. So I'm just gonna iron it and prepare it to be sewn down. So now I'm gonna take this over to my sewing machine, and I'm gonna stitch right along the edge that I folded, and that's gonna create the casing for our elastic. Now I do want to leave a couple inches open so that way we can insert the elastic later. Also make sure when you're sewing this that you're pulling the bodice part taut, just so it's exactly how it's supposed to lay, and there's not going to be any puckering, because sometimes when you iron it, it gets puckered in there and won't lay right. So just be aware of that. Once you have that casing sewn, next we're going to take our elastic, and you should have cut out the waist elastic guide, but I always like to measure the elastic around my waist and where it's going to sit so that I know how it's going to be and if I like it or if I want it tighter or even looser. So now I'm going to take the end of my elastic, put a safety pin in it, and then I'm going to thread it through the encasing. Make sure that you hold on to the end of it, the other end of it, so that you don't accidentally pull it all the way through and you have to start all over. So I just like using a safety pin because it's easier to hold on to. With these little encasings, it's a little more tricky, especially in these bulkier areas right here where the pocket is. So here I have my elastic threaded through. You can see it kind of scrunching up. I don't want to pull too tight or it's gonna end up going back in there. I want to make sure it's not twisting, and then I'm going to lay these over about 1/2 of an inch and do a zigzag stitch over them to secure them together, and then it can pop in there. Okay, I did my zigzag stitch a couple times back and forth. Now I can kind of stretch this out and let it go in there. And now I'm going to take this back over to my sewing machine and close that encasing off so you won't even have any raw edges or elastic sticking out. Now the jumpsuit is almost complete, so now I'm going to finish off with the tie, and I just have the notched ends. I'm going to put them right sides together, and I'm going to sew those together at 3/8 of an inch. Once you have that notched edged stitched, then you're going to turn it right sides together and fold it in half lengthwise. It really helps if you take it over to the ironing board and iron it down, because now we're going to stitch it down along the whole edge, and I'm actually going to continue down and stitch down on this side and on the other side. So you do want to leave a couple inch opening so that we can turn it right sides out, and then we'll stitch that down later. Once you have your tie sewn, you're going to turn it right sides out. And I did not take my own advice, and I actually sewed it closed, so I just clipped that open, and I'm just going to turn this right sides out. So however you need to, wherever you left that opening, turn it right sides out now. Now, once you have the tie turned right sides out, I'm going to take mine over to my ironing board. I definitely poked a few holes through it, so I'm going to just iron those closed. And I actually just want to top stitch around the entire thing because I think it'll just look a lot nicer and just finish off the belt, tie, whatever you want to call it, a lot better. So I'm just going to do that real quick. Just do a top stitch all the way around, and it will even close off the opening that I actually meant to have. So, but if you don't want any top stitching on it, you can also do a slip stitch to close the opening that you had to turn it right sides out. Now, one other thing that you can do is on the side seams, you can create little loops with your thread, just a needle and thread, little loops to hold your tie in place. But I'm not going to do that because I like the option of either having the tie or not having the tie. That way I don't have these little things hanging on there when I don't have the tie. So I'm just going to leave those off. And now I'm ready to hem the jumper. So I'm actually going to try it on. I made mine a little bit longer just in case because I do have longer legs. So I'm going to try mine on and check it out and see, make sure I like the length. So I suggest you do the same at this point, and then we can come back and actually hem it. To hem the bottom of the jumpsuit, I'm just going to take it, and I've turned mine wrong sides out, and I'm going to fold it up 1.5 inches. Now, like I said before, you want to try them on and make sure you like the length, and if you need to turn it up more or less, that's totally fine. I'm just going to turn mine up 1.5 inches, and then I'm probably going to take that over to my ironing board and iron that down. And then this raw edge right here, so that you don't see it anymore and there's no fraying, I'm going to take that and tuck that under 1/4 to 1/2 inch and fold it under just like that so that there won't be any fraying and you won't have to worry about it. So now I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine, and I'm just going to stitch right on the edge of that all the way around, and that'll finish off our hem. And then once you are done hemming, you are all done with your jumpsuit. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!